time to get your fix. Come on down, get your horrible gaming review. 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 Wow.
Hello, my name is Zachariah with Old Man Gaming, and welcome to another horrible game review. Now, a few disclaimers before we get into it. The word horrible in the title of this video does not necessarily refer to the actual game or content that I'm reviewing, but much more the video itself. I do snap judgment reviews here, so I get about 5 to 10 hours with the game, and I'm trying to give you a brief idea of whether you're going to have fun right off the bat or not. That being said, I do snap judgment reviews here, so I don't give scores. I don't believe in them for video games anyway. I think it's one of the most subjective forms of art. So what you're going to get here is an overview of what the game is, the pros and cons of what the game or DLC is in my point of view, as all reviews are, and then I'm going to tell you whether or not I personally will be sticking with this outside the purposes of this review. Special disclaimer, this is my 100th review. My 100th review. I don't know. I stumbled upon that information the other day. I got 99 reviews in the playlist, I guess, and now I'm at 100. This is my 100th, and this has been a constant, popular piece of content for the channel. So I just want to say really quickly, thank you to all of you who have tuned in and found my opinion so valuable over the years. And you know, here's to 100 more if I can keep doing it. That being said, I saw this fact a little bit ago, which is why we haven't had a ton of reviews, because it was kind of really wanted to do a positive review for my 100th, even if it wasn't something that got a ton of views. And I wasn't playing a ton of new games, because honestly, not a lot of them are coming out right now. So I finally found one, and that is Wildermyth. We're going to do that for our 100th review. So what is Wildermyth? Wildermyth is a procedurally generated story-based role-playing game. All the action plays out in strategic battles, kind of turn-based tactical, much like your Wasteland or something like that. It usually has grid-based play. You have a certain number of action points, and you have to manage those in the battle to be able to do movements, actions, and other stuff. Other than that, though, there's an overworld, which basically tells you how your characters move via tokens. There's nothing really special about it, although there is a strategy to how you move your characters and to where you move them. The characters themselves, like I said, are procedurally generated, and with a huge amount of customization to them. Unlike other procedural generation games that I am aware of offhand, as soon as they're procedurally generated, you can mess with all of their kind of their names, their backstory, that sort of thing. They do have specific personalities, though, and those personalities stay the same because that's really needed. And that's really the essence of this game, and why I really wanted to review this game and look at this game. Because anybody who's watched this channel for any period of time knows that I absolutely love procedural generation. I think it's the future of gaming. I think the system is so fascinating and awesome to me. So any game that has procedural generation in it just kind of calls to me, whether it's roguelites, whether it's like State of Decay or Watch Dogs, Legion, where it generates the characters, any sort of thing like that kind of just draws me in because I want to see what that is going to be like. Wildermyth does something very different with the procedural generation. It uses it to do something that other procedural generation games don't really do very well, and that is story. Cohesive, interlocking story. So anytime you go to anything, and anytime you make any action, you get a story, a little chunk of snippet of story from the characters, one or all of the characters that are actually participating in this action. The story takes place over these quick, like comic style vignettes in front of you, where like the the boxes and pages kind of appear in front of you, and then you get some choices as how the character proceeds. There are, so you get this mixture of randomly generated ones, or not randomly generated ones. You can tell that all of these story kind of scenarios have been pre-generated by people. However, how the characters interact with them, how they talk with them, are procedurally generated. So you'll get these kind of like random ones that just pop up while you're doing something, and you'll also get story related ones to the chapter or story that you're doing. But what's interesting is, depending on the characters that you have at the time, the dialogue and sometimes even the outcomes of these procedurally generated story moments are completely different, wildly different. I've played with two different, I'm actually in my third game. I only finished one, I got halfway through another, and then I am roughly halfway through my third. And I have definitely gotten some of these scenarios a couple more times, but they're so different in the dialogue and the options that I've actually really had to think, did I get this one before, or is this new? No, I did get this one before, just because of the pacing. And that's something I've just never seen. I mean, if there's anything procedural generation games we've seen before has lacked, it is the ability to tell a perfectly cohesive story. I mean, they tell them, but you need a lot of imagination, especially in like games like State of Decay 2, where people will say something at weird inopportune moments, and then another character will respond to it in a weird way, and you're just kind of like, that didn't really make sense, because those social elements haven't been there. Whereas Wildermyth doubles down and focuses on that aspect. Now, this is all delivered to you in this kind of almost cartoonish, childlike art design, and kind of through the idea that it's all a storybook and playing in front of you. Now, you'll play a scenario that takes anywhere from 8 to like 15 hours, and this game has surprisingly quite a few scenarios. These scenarios take place over chapters, and each chapter is interwoven with like 5 to 10 years of piece in between. So what happens is you play that chapter, it has a conclusion, and then your characters actually, depending on what they did, advance through the in-between and age through those moments of peace. What's interesting about that is they develop relationships, they develop other things, and you get to see that play out in front of you. This game does something crazy, and it really it has a crazy way of truly attaching you to these characters. Not just in a way like of using your own imagination, but I mean truly getting into the personalities of these characters and really feeling like they're 3D characters instead of just procedurally generated avatars that you kind of give life to yourself. That being said, they can have kids, those kids can join you, they can fall in love, they can fall in hate, they can become friends, all sorts of things. And of course, if they die, they're dead. What's interesting then is once you finish it, you have to start a new chapter with 3 procedurally generated starter characters, but you can recruit living, previously surviving characters from other stories, as long as they haven't reached their retirement age. I just found this game so interesting. The factors that happen with it, the factors that really influence the play. I had one character get struck in the eye with a poison, so his whole face kind of grew this like weird half Gorgon thing, and that just stayed with him the whole time. I had a love story in the first one. They had a kid. The kid ended up staying with us. Like, it's just so much like every time you play, you get this uniqueness of story, which really isn't something you've seen before. I'm getting ahead of myself, of course, but basically that's it. The whole idea is you do this scenario, then you rinse and repeat over and over again with your legacies. You can change difficulty. You can put on permadeath, turn off permadeath, stuff like that. The best way to describe it is a sandbox game, but with the story. Now, the actual combat itself is very diverse and interesting, though the art style, I mean, obviously this game was developed by like 3 to 6 people, it looks like. They did a bang-up job, but they had to cut some corners. There's no actual voice acting in this, and the combat takes place in this kind of like pop-up book art style, so none of the character avatars actually move in combat. They just kind of like dance over to something and then kind of like shift their position slightly, and then the other one takes damage, which can take a little bit away from combat with no animations whatsoever. Still, the combat is in actual like practice, very dense, strategically sound, and with a lot of options about how to actually play and how to actually combat your foes. There's a lot of buildable strategies. Magic is also very interesting. It allows you, instead of just casting spells, your magicians infuse themselves with objects around the battlefield. Depending on the object you infuse, is the power you use when you cast the spell, and it oftentimes destroys the object that you have. That object is also potentially providing cover or stealth for one of your other characters. So it really, really pulls you into the battle in a strategic level on the scenery base. You really have to know what's around you, what you're using, what you're infused with, and what you do. Plus, they have this really cool mechanic that any fire on the map can actually spread if there's debris around it, which is even cooler. Sometimes you can get into these battles where you start a fire thinking it's good, and the fire starts to spread, and then all of a sudden you're in a race against time to defeat the bad guys before the fire burns you. It's very interesting strategic play here. And the sheer volume of abilities and powers that these characters you can give them when they level up makes combat truly dynamic. So with that said, I've already gushed a bunch, but let's get into the pros and cons. And you know I like to start with pros. I like to start positive. Pros, it's hard for me not just to say this entire game is a pro. But the procedural generation of story is a masterclass, an absolute masterclass. They took something that every other company had done, but not done correctly, and decided to do it. And that's really cool. One thing I love about procedural generation, following procedural generation, is you have this aspect that like it's new. It's still new and fresh. We're seeing what we can do with it and seeing how we can push those bounds. And these guys, guys and gals, they really took something that was different. Like that, they looked at all the other procedural generations and said, let's do this. Nobody else has done this. It really sets them apart. And it really makes this game kind of magical to behold and participate in. I mean, pros are so hard to say because this game is universally great. I love the way you move around the overworld. I love the way you have to choose between building up resources and defending zones against enemy monster attacks. And I love the combat. The combat is truly interesting and diverse. There was a slight couple of hiccups with it that we'll talk about in the cons, but they're real nitpicky. But overall, combat is fun over and over again, and because you have such an interesting, deep well of combat abilities and attacks, especially by the mid game, I never got bored with. I still haven't gotten bored with combat. I'm in my, third playthrough, and one thing about tactical games is sometimes they get a little boring. Sometimes you'd rather avoid the combat because the battles take really long and they're very tedious sometimes. But it's always new and fresh here. There's always something fun and interesting to try and do, and it's also not long-winded in combat. Combat is usually quick, brutal, and deadly, and that's great. It gives you that feeling of my back's up against the wall, but it also never takes too long to the point where you're spending an hour in a fight. My next pro would definitely be it's not too long-winded in the text scenes. Like, look, I'm not going to give it the con that it doesn't have voice acting, even though normally I would in a text-based game. That being said, one of the reasons I'm not going to is because the writing is good, but it's quick, it's concise, and it's paced really well. There isn't long-winded expositions. There's very few long-winded expositions. There's almost no draw conversations, and somehow they have comedic timing in there, which I didn't know you could procedurally generate comedic timing, but they managed to do it in this. And all of it seems snappy, quick, and fun, and I never feel like I'm reading too much, even though I'd say 90% of this game is reading. It's just the way they break it up and the way they pace it is such a genius move that it almost makes you forget that it's not being read. All right, I guess we got to move to cons now. This is extremely nitpicky, though, because, like I said, I don't necessarily find any of these cons. I tend to be a community-driven channel. I know some people who didn't like some things about it. I'm going to say those things about it now so that you can be aware of it. Number one, the art style is very kiddie, very rudimentary. I think that, like I said, that's because it is a smaller team who need to do procedural generation and make it less complicated. So the art is very, very storybook kid sort of thing. And if you're not into that, it's going to put you off a little bit. And the lack of combat animations in the fights and that pop-up book style in the fights is a little bit obnoxious and annoying. The actual combat itself plays perfectly, absolutely plays perfectly, but, and like I said, extreme nitpicking here, but, you know, the enemies just kind of falling down and going up in a poof of smoking is very anticlimactic, especially when you have those big battles. And it also, sometimes you have a hard time telling where in relation to you some of the objects are just because of the style and the stuff. So yeah, that'd be a big con. That wouldn't be a big con, but it'd be one of the cons. One of my personal cons is that you can't pan the camera in any way that I can find. So I can't look at the battlefield from a different angle, which is a big contributor to the fact that, like, sometimes I'm like, where exactly is that object in relation to me? Because you're kind of looking at it from one direction. And then finally, you know, that's it. That's all the cons. That's all the cons I can think of that I'm willing to say in this, because this game is just great. And as far as, am I going to stick with it? I think you guys know the answer. In a year, actually, yeah, definitely a year, maybe even more, almost every game I've purchased with my own money has been a regret. Confession time. They've just all been like letdowns eventually. Outriders, Biomutant eventually kind of really, I know my review of it is good, but it gets old really fast. So you play it for more than that 10 hours, you're like, I'm kind of done with this. And then there was another one that recently that I purchased that I don't know. It's been a lot. Oh, Marvel's Avengers. Like, so many of them I purchased. Just regretted so much. And this game, it's only $26.80 with tax. And yeah, it's amazing. It's my game of the year right now. So happy I was able to purchase a game that I actually enjoyed instead of having, you know, buyer's remorse and regret. So I love this game. It's absolutely total positive on this. Unless you're really against tactical strategy-based games, otherwise, or really against fantasy, otherwise, you should absolutely try this game. You should absolutely try this game. Pick it up, try it, give it a try. If you don't fall in love with it, you don't fall in love with it, but I love this game. You're unique. The ability to get that unique experience every time is just so cool and rewarding and interesting. And the fact that the characters actually feel like 3D dimensional characters, even though they're completely unique to your game, is just great. So there you guys go. You can contact us on Facebook at OldManGamingDH, on Twitter at OldManGaming9. You can join our Discord, links in the description below. You can check us out on Twitch at OldManGamingDH. And yeah, as long as you guys keep watching and listening, we'll keep making them. And thank you so much for watching 100 of these. And I'll see you guys next week.